Useless. Even at your own wife's funeral. That's what my son called me. 6 months ago, I buried Margot Vaughn. My wife, my partner, the woman who stood beside me through 43 years of love loss and everything in between. Derek is all I have left. Yet barely 3 hours after his mother was laid to rest, he looked me straight in the eye and said words no father should ever have to hear. Beside him, Vanessa, his wife, nodded softly, smiling that thin, mechanical smile that never quite reached her eyes. Dad, you're a burden now. It's time you faced reality. My name is Ellis Vaughn, 68 years old, retired founder of a financial software company that once employed hundreds. For most of my life, I believed the greatest thing I ever built wasn't my business. It was my family. But I've learned that sometimes family is the first place that teaches you what betrayal truly feels like. I lived with Derek and Vanessa in the building I bought for them back in 2018. A gift made out of love, not obligation. And this is the story of how a father was betrayed and how I let justice speak louder than revenge. Before I tell you the rest, let me know where you're watching from. And if you too believe that justice sometimes begins in silence, subscribe and don't miss stories like this one. That afternoon, Austin was colder than usual. I stood still between rows of wooden pews, the sound of the organ echoing softly from the back of the church. A faint wind slipped through the old stained glass windows, brushing the black ribbon draped over Margot's casket. 43 years of marriage closed within 30 minutes of prayer. I stared at her photo on the altar, her smile as gentle as that morning by Lake Travis when we were young, and foolish enough to think time was something we could keep. My hand tightened around the funeral program, the paper thin enough to tear if I breathed too hard. When the pastor spoke the final words, I heard Derek inhale sharply behind me. He didn't cry. Neither did I. Margot once told me people only cry when they still believe things can change. I didn't believe in that anymore. After the service, the crowd thinned out, just a few neighbors, the last of the family, and the weight of the air that smelled faintly of dust and lilies. Derek patted my shoulder awkwardly, saying we should head home. I nodded. The penthouse sat on the 23rd floor of the Haven on 6th, a place Margot chose because she loved how the city lights shimmered across the Colorado River each night. When we walked in, everything was exactly as she left it, only quieter. The picture frames the orchids on the window ledge, her teacup from that morning still stained with lipstick. I reached for the coffee pot, but Derek was already seated at the dining table, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. Vanessa stood by the window, arms crossed. I laid my coat on the chair. No one spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the heater and the faint creak of the wood floors. Then Derek said in a voice too even, too rehearsed, "Dad, we need to talk about the condo. You know I'm managing the family LLC now. I need you to transfer ownership so I can handle the taxes before the quarter ends." I looked at him, eyebrows narrowing, wondering if I'd misheard. Vaughn Holdings, LLC. I founded it over 15 years ago when FinEdge systems first began to grow. Every asset, every title, every signature had my name on it. I spoke slowly, holding my tone steady. This condo belongs to Vaughn Holdings Derek. I'm still the legal owner. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice calm, too calm. We're just trying to help Dad. You've worked hard your whole life. Maybe it's time to rest. Let us handle the paperwork, the taxes. You've done enough. I sat down and looked at the two people I had raised with my own hands. Derek wouldn't meet my eyes. His gaze stayed glued to the phone in his lap, like he was reading someone else's lines. I placed my own phone on the table, pressed the record button, and spoke quietly. "So, you're asking me to leave my own home?" He looked up, voice tightening. "Dad, You're occupying property that technically belongs to me. I'm only trying to make things legal and clear. Mom's gone and you're not thinking straight. I just don't want legal trouble later." I stared at him, searching for the boy who used to sing along to old country songs in the truck on the way to school. He wasn't there anymore. My voice came out quiet, cold, even to my own ears. "Is that so?" Vanessa placed a hand on his shoulder like a director giving a cue. "You're tired, Dad. This place is too big for one person. Maybe it's time you moved somewhere comfortable like Sunset Manor. It's beautiful there. People your age. You'd have company." Inside my head, Margot's voice returned from her hospital bed at Del Seaton. "Don't ever let anyone call you a burden." I took a breath, scanning the room. The wedding photo still sat beside the vase of dried flowers. Under the warm light, the petals looked the color of ash. I stepped onto the balcony. The Austin wind was sharp, cutting through the dark, tugging the last black ribbon from my wrist. Behind me, Derek spoke again, voice trembling beneath a layer of practiced calm. "Dad, I just want what's best for you. Everything will be safer if it's in my name." I turned back to him, watching the lines on his face, each one a memory of the nights I spent building a company to pay for his education, of the mornings Margot comforted him after his failures. Every sacrifice led to this moment, my son speaking to me, as though I were a stranger. "When you married Vanessa," I said quietly, "I gave you this condo rent-free for 7 years. I paid the taxes, the repairs, everything. I thought that was love. What do you call it?" He looked away. Vanessa gave a tight smile. "You've done a lot. We appreciate it. But things change. It's time for the next generation to take responsibility." I said nothing. I stopped. The recording slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked past them. The air felt heavy and distant, as though the world had stepped a few feet away. All that remained was the slow, deliberate sound of my own heartbeat, like the ticking of the old wall clock. When the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the metal panel. The man looking back wasn't the widower who buried his wife that morning. He was someone stripped bare of everything that used to hold him together. In the garage, I sat in the car, hands on the wheel, engine silent. Outside, the city lights flickered across wet pavement. People laughed somewhere. The world kept turning. And I sat there, a man who had just lost love, trust, and the last piece of home he thought he had. In my pocket, the phone still recorded, warm, alive, like the pulse of something broken but not dead. I knew that when I listened to it again, I wouldn't just hear my son's voice. I'd hear the sound of something cracking open inside me. If Margot were still here, she would tell me the same thing she always did. "Don't get angry. Remember every word." I started the car and looked up at the glowing windows of the 23rd floor. Somewhere above me, my son thought he'd won. But he'd forgotten something I learned a long time ago in business. The first person to sign the paper isn't always the one who keeps the property. I drove away slowly, leaving behind the building I'd built with my own hands. And as the city lights blurred in my rearview mirror, only one thought stayed clear. This morning, I buried my wife. By nightfall, I had nearly buried my son too. Morning broke with a pale light and the thin breath of mist rising off the water. I sat in my small study at the corner of the apartment, the window facing Lake Travis, the surface still and glassy like an old mirror that no longer reflected youth. I set my phone on the desk, slid the timeline back, and pressed play. The recording hissed, then Derek's voice came through, sharp and close enough that I almost turned around. "Dad, this is my property." I could hear my own breathing on the tape, steady, restrained, the sound of a man listening to a stranger. I replayed it again, letting the words drive themselves deeper. No hesitation, no trace of love in the pauses between syllables. Only declaration. command. The practiced cadence of someone who had learned to talk down to others and call it reason. I didn't know where he learned that tone, but I knew the silence that allowed it had been mine. I reached under the desk, pulled out the small safe, and lifted a bundle of files tied with a strip of fabric. Vaughn Holdings, LLC. The papers smelled faintly of old ink, and storage, Margot used to say that smell comforted her because it meant the law still existed somewhere orderly and intact. I opened each folder carefully. Membership registry, meeting minutes, resolutions. The penthouse at the Haven on 6th was still held by the company, and the company still under my authority. Nothing had changed except for one document. A temporary power of attorney. I'd signed it in the second quarter of 2023, when Margot was admitted for her third round of treatment. I'd given Derek limited rights to handle insurance and taxes, nothing more. It had an expiration date, clear as daylight, and an explicit clause forbidding asset transfers. I'd signed it in that hospital room, my hand trembling after a sleepless night. Derek had stood by the window that morning and said, "I'll handle it, Dad. I'll take care of Mom. I'll take care of everything." I wanted to believe him. And I did. Now the ink on that page was still crisp, but the meaning had warped in his head. I set the document beside the phone, the clean precision of the seal, next to the coarse arrogance of his recorded words. One side law, the other greed. I sat still, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, the distant rhythm of cars along 6th Street. Outside, the lake began to ripple. A thin line of gold slid across the surface like a thread pulled taut. There was a knock at the door, 2 soft taps. When I opened it, Pastor Franklin stood there, his gray wool coat dotted with dew, holding a small loaf of warm bread wrapped in a clean towel. He didn't offer condolences. We'd said all those words already last night and the month before when Margot was moved into hospice. He set the bread on the counter, poured 2 mugs of coffee, and sat opposite me. His eyes were kind, but worn like 2 stones resting at the bottom of a river. He asked if I'd slept. I shook my head. He said some people handle grief by talking too much, others by not talking at all, and either one, if left alone too long, can turn into something darker. I told him about last night, about Derek's words, about the feeling of a door slamming on a room I thought would always be mine. I didn't mention humiliation. I didn't have to. Franklin understood. He looked at the file on the desk at the phone with the recording still open and said quietly, "Don't let grief turn into bitterness. But don't let trust turn into weakness either." The sentence landed between us like a tightrope stretched over water. I told him I wasn't going to argue anymore, I'd let the law speak for me. He nodded. Not in approval, not in judgment, just understanding. He took a sip of coffee and said that law was a compass, but the path toward it still had to be chosen carefully. "You can be right," he said, "and still lose if you walk the wrong road." We ate the bread in silence. It was warm, soft, the butter and herbs lifting the room's chill. Before leaving, Franklin reminded me that the church would hold Margot's memorial that weekend. If I needed quiet, the chapel doors were always open. I knew what he wanted to say about forgiveness, but he didn't. He knew I wasn't ready, and he was wise enough not to force it. After he left, I sat back at the desk. Margot's will was in a sealed envelope beside the files. I didn't open it. We'd already reviewed it together when she was still strong enough to correct the last few lines. There were no surprises, just clear instructions for a scholarship fund, a donation to the senior care center where she used to volunteer. The penthouse remained with the company. At the end of the document, she'd left a handwritten note. If conflict ever comes, seek the right person, the one who knows how to defend fairness without losing compassion. Her handwriting trembled, but the meaning was firm. I thought of Ruth Delgado immediately. Before calling Ruth, I wanted my numbers straight. I opened my laptop, logged into the company account, pulled up the tax reports and depreciation files. In 2020, Derek had signed off on a few medical expense claims well within his authority, no irregularities. But in the internal notes, I saw something else, a subtle shift in language. Words like representative replaced with manager. Then manager became owner. The meaning drifted inch by inch until last night it fell off the edge entirely. I leaned back in my chair, eyes closed, listening to the recording again, not to hurt, but to document. I marked the timestamp, the presence of witnesses, the phrasing of intent. I made a list of names, the neighbors who attended the funeral, a distant cousin who overheard dinner, the concierge who saw Derek's face as we left. This wasn't a family quarrel anymore. It was evidence. By noon, the sunlight had warmed the room. The glow on the desk was the same soft gold Margot used to chase every morning when she opened the windows for her orchids. I knew I'd see traces of her everywhere in this home. I also knew that if I let this matter fade like so many before, I'd betray what she believed I still was. I didn't want to give Derek an enemy. I wanted to give him a mirror. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek, short, cold, transactional. He reminded me about tax deadlines, told me not to complicate things, said the law would side with him if I didn't comply. I read it without anger, only recognition. It was the same mistake I'd seen in countless young investors, the confusion between luck and skill. He'd grown up watching me win more often than lose. He'd never learned the cost of ownership. I called Franklin's office line. He answered with a quiet laugh and said he'd pray that I didn't lose myself chasing justice. I told him I didn't need prayer. I needed a ledger. He chuckled again. Sometimes they're the same thing, he said, and wished me luck. I scrolled through my contacts and found Ruth Delgado. Next to her name was a note Margot had left years ago. If something serious ever happens, call Ruth. She talks fast, but she thinks slow enough not to miss the details. I stared at that note longer than I should have. Even gone, Margot was still teaching me how to listen. I called. 4 rings. Then Ruth's voice came through low, clear, the sound of ink drawn across paper. I told her I needed to meet today, that I had the recording, all the company documents, and potential witnesses. She paused for a few seconds before asking if I was sure I wanted to start this way. I said I'm done arguing. I'll let the law do the talking. Ruth said she could see me at 3. When I hung up, the wind outside had picked up. The lake shimmered silver. I gathered the papers into a folder, careful, as if I were holding something fragile. When I zipped the case closed, my hand no longer trembled. I put on my coat, switched off the lamp, and paused at the doorway. The faint smell of warm bread still lingered in the kitchen, soft and comforting. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I finally knew there were still people who stood quietly on the side of the light. I lifted the case, stepped out, and locked the door. Before leaving, I turned once more toward the study. Margot's photo leaned slightly on the shelf, sunlight grazing its frame, and throwing a thin streak of gold across the wall. I whispered to her that I'd keep my promise. Then I turned the key, walked down the hall, and headed for the garage. Down there, among the sleeping cars, I opened the map app, typed in Ruth Delgado's office, and pressed start. The GPS voice began to guide me as I held the folder close on the passenger seat, steady, deliberate, like a man carrying what was left of his own heart. The road to Ruth Delgado's office cut through South Congress, where cafes were still buzzing even close to noon. Texas sunlight angled through the windshield, glancing off the old brick buildings, each window pane catching fire like an eye that had seen too much and said nothing. I parked in front of a beige two-story building. The bronze plaque read Delgado and Associates, its surface glowing faintly in the light. Between a Mexican barber shop and a small print shop, the smell of roasted coffee drifted through the warm air, tangled with exhaust fumes and the faint heaviness of early March. I grabbed the folder from the passenger seat and stepped out. My palm still felt tight around the handle. The waiting room was modest, lined with framed bar certificates and oil paintings that looked older than the building itself. The receptionist recognized me and gestured toward the last door down the hall. "She's expecting you." Ruth stood as I entered. Her gray hair was tied back neatly, her face tanned and lined, in the way of someone who's seen people at their worst and still chosen kindness. "Ellis," she said. "Margot always told me you'd never come here unless you truly had to." I took a seat and placed the folder on the desk. "Today I said I have to." Ruth spread out the documents, arranging them with the quiet precision of habit, then slipped on her reading glasses. Light spilled in through the blinds, touching the table, making the legal print gleam like something alive. She read quickly. Her finger ran along the pages, pausing only for seconds before moving again. The room was so still I could hear the clock tick on the far wall. After a few minutes, she looked up, her tone steady. "You haven't lost anything, Ellis. Vaughn Holdings is still under your control. The registration is valid. Your son only holds temporary representation, no authority to transfer or mortgage the property." I exhaled a sound more tired than relieved, but Ruth lifted her hand slightly, stopping me. "There's something else," she said, her voice lowering. Derek used that limited power of attorney to open a commercial loan with First Capital Bank, $300,000 secured against the company's interest in the LLC, which represents the penthouse at the Haven. The loan was signed last December, while Margot was still in the hospital. The air thinned. My throat felt dry. Ruth pulled a statement from her own file and slid it toward me. Derek's signature sat there, unmistakable, familiar, but trembling at the edges. The witness signature was someone I didn't recognize, likely a bank officer. Ruth's voice cut through the fog. "The loan hasn't defaulted yet. But if you want full control back, the fastest way is to buy out the note before the bank initiates restructuring." I asked if that was even legal. "Entirely," she said. "You can repurchase it personally or through the company. It'll take at least 3 weeks longer if we need to renegotiate terms." Her words blurred into the hum of the city outside. I thought of Derek at the funeral, saying we'd need to get things in order. Maybe he had. Just not in the direction I imagined. Ruth stood and crossed the room for a glass of water. She set it in front of me. The reflection in it was warped, an older man with too much clarity in his eyes. "I knew Margot," she said softly. "She believed in reason. If she were still here, she'd tell you to do what's right, not what's easy." I nodded. "I'll buy back the loan." She studied me, half concern, half respect. "Ellis, you understand this won't be simple. The bank could push back. Derek will know the moment the transaction begins. Are you ready for that?" I told her I'd lived 68 years and lost more things than I could count, but never my sense of what was fair. 3 weeks was nothing. I'd waited a lifetime to teach my son the cost of responsibility. Ruth's lips curved into a weary smile. "This isn't revenge, Ellis. It's a lesson." "I know," I said. "I don't teach with anger. I teach with proof." It surprised me how easily the words came out, maybe because I finally believed them, or maybe because truth was all I had left. Ruth pulled a fresh form from her drawer, jotted a few notes, and handed it to me. Authorization to negotiate with the bank. I signed. My handwriting was firm, straight, deliberate. She gathered the papers and secured them in a hard cover, her movements deliberate and calm. The room around us looked like her precise, contained, disciplined. A framed law degree, a photo of her team, a small cactus on the shelf, still green despite the years. She promised to begin that afternoon to contact First Capital, request loan details, and reach the account officer. If Derek gets notified, she said, let me handle it. He's the kind who wants to win by volume, not by logic. I gave a faint smile. I used to be that kind. I know how to silence it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The light through the blinds slanted, dividing the room into warm gold and shadow. Ruth said she'd seen too many families torn apart over money. It's rarely about being poor, she said. It's about forgetting that money is supposed to be a result, not a purpose. I looked at her. I know that better than most. But sometimes it takes betrayal to remember the lesson you once taught. She nodded, then asked what I'd do while we waited for the paperwork. I'll wait, I said. Like a farmer waits for harvest. Let the anger cool. Let reason do its work. Ruth chuckled softly. You sound like a poet, Ellis. But in this case, poetry won't save you. Even lawyers, I said, need a little poetry to survive the fine print. That made her laugh for real. A small sound, but it warmed the room. When I stood to leave, Ruth said she'd call as soon as the bank responded. We shook hands, firm and honest. Outside, the Texas sun struck the sidewalk like gold glass. My chest felt lighter, not from victory, but from direction. On the way to the car, I paused by the print shop next door. The sign read, Copies and Notary Services. I thought I might need a few certified duplicates soon. In the glass door, my reflection stared back, older, harder, but not yet bitter. I opened the car, set the folder on the seat beside me. Inside it, Ruth's handwriting listed a single name, the loan officer at First Capital. I looked at it for a long second, then turned the key. Margot's favorite song played on the radio, soft and slow, like music meant for those who understood that justice, like love, always arrives late, but never disappears. I drove down Congress Avenue, the sun sliding west, the sky bleeding from gold to amber. In the rearview mirror, my shadow stretched long behind me, a thin line drawn toward something I couldn't yet undo. And I knew when this game finally began, Derek would realize what he was truly up against. Not power, not money, truth. And the truth, no matter how deep you bury it, always finds its way back to the surface. 3 weeks passed, like a slow hammer, striking the same nerve, steady, patient, inevitable. Every morning, Ruth's emails arrived, short surgical updates. The bank responded. Legal is reviewing. The loan officer will send the addendum. Then silence for another day. I learned to wait the way people relearn how to breathe after an accident. Not too fast, not too slow, just enough to stay upright. By the final Friday, the air itself felt like it was holding its breath. I walked into the title escrow office on Guadalupe, where big deals usually ended in handshakes that lasted less than 3 seconds. The conference room smelled of new paper and fresh coffee. On the table sat 3 folders each, thick as a private history. Ruth was already there. Glasses folded neatly beside her notes, right hand, holding a pen, left hand resting on the table, as if to anchor the calm in the room. The door opened. Martin Kowalski walked in thinner than the man I remembered from the business journals. His suit fit, but only barely, a loose thread frayed at the lapel. His eyes swept the room, me Ruth, the bank's representative, and landed finally on the documents. There was no pride left in them, only relief, the kind that comes when a drowning man touches land. The bank officer read the terms aloud, flat formal, without melody. The commercial loan with First Capital, the file number, the collateral represented by shares tied to the Haven penthouse, the transfer rights, the substitution clauses, the default provisions. Words I'd heard my entire career, but today, each syllable felt like a stone, laid carefully on the path I had no choice but to walk. Ruth leaned in, reviewed the last page, and gave a small nod. I signed first. The pen moved without tremor. Martin signed after me, his hand shaking slightly, as if every letter took something from him. The bank officer stamped the paper, the sound crisp and final. In that moment, the building's fate shifted quietly, lawfully, without ceremony. Vaughn Holdings LLC now held the note, and with it, control. Reality rarely announces itself with thunder. It simply is. Martin looked at me and said he hoped the building would do better under its new owner than it had under him. I nodded once. No need for comfort, no room for pity. The numbers had already spoken their truth. He walked out lighter, like a man who'd finally set down a suitcase he'd carried too long. Ruth gathered the documents and looked at me the way a surgeon might after a long operation measured relief, cautious pride. "It's done," she said. "You'll get the electronic confirmation today, the hard copies next week." I thanked her. We both knew this wasn't just a transaction, it was the first movement in a new order. I drove to the Haven on 6th, that block of glass and steel, standing quiet against the Austin skyline. The parking lot was full. The same security guard at the gate nodded, like always unaware that everything behind those windows had just shifted. Inside, the air smelled of cold perfume and chlorine. A small cactus sat on the reception counter, perfectly arranged, indifferent to human tension. I paused at the wall of resident names, engraved brass plates lined evenly by floor. 9th floor, 3rd line. Derek Vaughn. The same number, the same font. I smiled faintly. My son's name still lived on the wall. Mine had simply returned to the paperwork that built it. I walked the ground floor hallway shoes, whispering against the tile. From the pool came laughter, the sound of children and water. The scent of wet wood and sunlight drifted through. The elevator doors opened and closed, carrying people up and down with their groceries, their flowers, their small dogs. For a moment I thought of Margot, how she would tell me not to gloat just to finish the task and get home before dark. My phone buzzed. Ruth. Her voice was clear. "I'll send the formal notice to building management about the new creditor rights and management liaison," she said. "I'll meet with them myself this afternoon," I replied. There was a short pause. "Ellis, what do you plan to do next?" I looked through the glass toward the silver letters of the Haven gleaming cold in the sun. "I'm adjusting the rent to market rate," I said. "Fair market. For everyone including family." Ruth exhaled softly. Maybe out of relief. "I'll draft the notice, include market data and Texas tenancy statutes. You'll have it within the hour." "Good," I said. "Send it to me and the building manager." I ended the call and approached the reception desk. The young clerk called upstairs, and a moment later, a middle-aged woman in a blue blouse appeared, Janet, the new property manager. Firm handshake, steady eyes. We met in a small glass conference room. I placed my business card on the table and summarized my legal standing in simple sentences. Janet nodded, opened her laptop, and began pulling up the files. I forwarded Ruth's documents, the transfer notice, the rental analysis comparing the Haven with adjacent buildings. Numbers don't argue. The Haven's rates sat well below comparable complexes with similar amenities. Janet took notes, asked about notice periods. I said 45 days with renewal options for tenants who wanted to lock in a smaller increase for 12 months. No one gets pushed out overnight, I added. They'll choose stay with new terms or move on to what they can afford. She nodded. That's the fairest way to do it. When the meeting ended, Janet said she'd seen transitions like this before. Tone matters, she said. If you choose your words right, it won't turn into a storm. I told her I agreed language would be the anchor holding the building steady in the days ahead. She smiled. I don't meet many creditors who talk about language. I'm not here to flex power, I said, just to restore measure. Back in the hallway, I lingered by the elevator. The doors slid open bright and soundless. I pictured Derek stepping out face tight, reading the notice, the formal language that couldn't be shouted down. I wondered who he'd call first, the bank, a lawyer, or me. I didn't know. But this time I'd listen with both ears and answer with documents. In the lobby, the afternoon light poured through the glass dome, stretching shadows long across the marble floor. I stopped at the steps outside, feeling like I'd just laid the first brick of a new foundation on the ruins of an old house. Across the street, a couple crossed at the light laughter, mingling with the honk of a cab. The city carried on, unaware of the quiet reordering happening behind the mirrored walls. My phone buzzed again. Ruth's draft notice. The language was precise, lawful almost too sharp. I changed one word, softened the tone, added a paragraph offering tenants extended terms, a breathing space. Ruth approved. She said she liked my phrase, breathing space, that every change without room to breathe becomes a shock. I understood that more than most. I sent the final draft to Janet for printing and delivery. My digital signature sat at the bottom straight, and even like a drawn line across open ground. Watching the screen fade to black, I felt the weight in my chest ease just slightly. I hadn't bought this debt to evict anyone. I bought it to reclaim something else, the right to be a father. A right that doesn't live on a nameplate, but in the quiet ability to draw a boundary and uphold it without raising your voice. In the car, I sat still before starting the engine. The same old briefcase rested on the passenger seat, now heavier by only a few sheets of paper, but papers that mattered. Soon envelopes stamped Vaughn Holdings would slide into mailboxes across the building. Some tenants would frown, some curse, some fall silent. And I would sit by the lake that night, listening to the wind, reviewing each clause once more. A father's work isn't to shield his children from every storm, but to teach them how to read the sky. I started the car, merged into traffic. In the rearview mirror, the Haven rose behind me, tall and cold in the late-day sun. I knew the first message would come soon. Sharp words, maybe anger. And I knew my reply would be the same as my intent, calm, documented with references, deadlines, and room left for dignity if he chose to keep it. At the next intersection, the light turned green. I pressed the gas, letting the city carry me forward a little farther before turning back to face what was waiting. The next afternoon, Janet sent me confirmation that the notices had been delivered to every resident's mailbox. She attached a photo white letterhead, black ink, the language firm, but calm. I zoomed in on the number $9, $200, sitting cleanly inside a sentence about market value and 45 days notice. Everything exactly where it belonged, like a clock finally set to the right time. I wasn't there when Vanessa opened her mailbox on the 9th floor, but later I learned she stood there for a long time, staring at the last line. The letter from management explained the renewal options that could soften the first year's increase, cited public data comparisons, mentioned a help desk in the lobby. She folded it, once slipped it into her bag, and walked home without saying a word. The door to their apartment shut harder than usual, a sharp metallic sound that rolled down the hallway and then disappeared. 15 minutes later, Janet's receptionist saw the First Capital Bank number flash on the building line, asking to verify the ownership of the loan attached to the Haven. The response followed the script the note had been reassigned to Vaughn Holdings, LLC. Primary contact, the office of Ruth Delgado. Janet logged the time and ended the call without commentary. I read her note and sat still for a while, the way a man listens for thunder that hasn't yet reached him. That evening, Derek called Martin. It was the same number from the old contact list. The call lasted less than 3 minutes. Martin's reply was simple. Your father got here first. It's done. No room left to bargain. Derek's tone dropped, stretched thin like a wire pulled too tight. I never heard that call, but Martin sent Ruth a short follow-up email summarizing it for the record. I opened it. Every line was so factual, it left no space for imagination. At home, Vanessa laid the letter flat on the table beside her laptop. On-screen rental listings across downtown Austin blinked the numbers, anchoring themselves in place like stones blocking a road. 3 neighboring buildings priced at the same range, some even higher. She typed the same question countless others ask when cornered by reality: how to lower rent fast. The search results came back vague and useless. Texas law was too specific for loopholes. She called Derek to the table. He scanned the letter and said, "This is revenge." Vanessa shook her head. "Maybe it's a lesson." Derek's jaw tightened. He'd always hated that word. He grabbed his phone and called an old friend from a small investment fund, asking how to undo a debt transfer. The answer came short. Unless there's fraud, the only path is proving incompetence. Vanessa looked at him. The idea slid into the room like a draft of cold air. That night, she sent an email from her tablet to a family attorney she'd once met through a client asking for an appointment. The next afternoon, she sat in a glass office high above Lamar Boulevard, where the carpet was thick and the air smelled faintly of peppermint oil. Across the desk, the attorney listened as Vanessa spoke, in the careful tone of someone rehearsing a case. My father-in-law is 70. He lost his wife. He's acting too fast. It's grief, not judgment. The attorney took notes, then asked for evidence. Vanessa produced the rent notice, the company name, the timeline. The attorney said she'd need medical records, proof of erratic behavior, witnesses. Vanessa had none of those. The lawyer suggested another route: negotiate in good faith. Ask for time. Offer maintenance or upgrade contributions in exchange for a slower increase. Vanessa nodded, but her eyes didn't move. She wasn't built for waiting. She'd rather fight than plead, but she knew when a battle would only make her look desperate. Later that night, Derek sent her a spreadsheet. "Don't worry, I've got a plan." She opened it. Rows of expenses, projections, debt. The red numbers bled through the cells like stains. Then the notes: personal loan, $208,000, failed East Austin property investment. Credit card, $35,000, margin call covered by liquidating deposit, debts he'd never mentioned. She called him into the living room. "What is this?" He spoke fast, too fast. "It's temporary. I've calculated everything. I just need Dad to sign a few documents and we'll be balanced again." Vanessa stared at him, the man who once bragged about precision, who loved expensive watches because they kept perfect time, because they never lied. Now his promises ticked, hollow gears slipping inside the casing. And she realized she'd been standing on the edge far longer than she thought. While they argued, Janet's next email went out to all residents, an invitation for one-on-one consultations about renewal options. The message was clean, professional, without hidden barbs. Vanessa read it and sat still. She didn't hate clarity. She hated being forced to face it before she was ready. Night deepened. Light from the building across the street streamed through the blinds, cutting long stripes across their wall. Derek hunched over his computer, both hands gripping his head, the screen burning red graphs like a forest on fire. Vanessa shut herself in the bedroom, scrolling through old texts and party photos, snapshots of a life she once mistook for stability. She typed a short message to her lawyer. When we negotiate, use community as leverage. The reply came quickly. Understood. By morning, Vanessa was in the lobby early. She asked to see Janet 5 minutes private. In the small office near the mailroom, she asked about market calculations, about locking in a 2-year renewal, about whether utility credits could offset the increase. Janet listened, noted, promised to forward her proposal to management. Vanessa thanked her voice softer now. She knew how to talk without fighting. She was a broker. She spoke the language of compromise. But for the first time, she realized there was no invisible safety net behind her. Around noon, Ruth sent me the summary of tenant responses. 28% had questions. More than half asked about long-term renewal options to lower the first-year adjustment. All predictable. At the bottom of the list, Ellis Vaughn. No questions, just one line. This is exploitation, and I will fight it. I read the words, feeling their weightless threat. People who promise to fight to the end rarely plan for the beginning. That afternoon, Vanessa sat again before the laptop. She opened the spreadsheet and added a new column, Viable Options. In it, she listed move outside downtown, contact 3 former clients for short-term rental leads, sell the luxury car, cut recurring purchases. Things she once considered unthinkable now looked like signposts. Derek glanced at the column, but said nothing. His personal debt figure sat frozen on the screen like a wet stone that refused to dry. That night, as the city dimmed, I sat by the window watching the string of headlights crossing the bridge. I thought about Vanessa, how her instinct for survival had always been sharper than my son's pride. I thought about how she tried to build a bridge while Derek still looked for matches. And I thought about my son, who believed that if he pushed hard enough, every wall would fall. I turned over the choices, mine, theirs, the laws, the markets, and the quiet force beneath them all, fear. I used to think my son was driven by greed. Now I understand. He was afraid. And fear, I've learned, makes people far more ruthless than hunger ever could. Vanessa texted that afternoon, inviting me to dinner. She said she just wanted to talk calmly to find some way to make things less hard for everyone. I said yes. Picked an early hour before the sky could turn dark. The 9th floor hallway gleamed white, smelling faintly of floor polish. At the far end was the door to the apartment I'd paid taxes on for years. Vanessa opened it. Her smile was tight, her eyes bruised from sleepless nights. Derek stood behind her shirt, buttoned all the way, hands in his pockets, as if holding something he couldn't quite control. The table was set with surgical precision. White linen, candles smelling of citrus and cinnamon, 2 glasses already poured halfway. I sat down, laid my car keys to the right, my document case beside the chair, my phone still in my jacket. The sounds were small, the scrape of a knife on porcelain, the ring of a spoon against glass, the kind of silence that amplifies a heartbeat. Vanessa poured more wine, her voice soft as fabric. I'm glad you came. I know things have been tense. I just want us to talk like a family. Derek added, Don't misunderstand us, Dad. We're just trying to make things practical. You've carried too much. It's time we took some of it. I cut into the chicken, chewed, slowly. Tender meat, balanced seasoning. But it tasted like something older, tougher. I set the fork down and wiped my mouth. What exactly, I asked, does practical mean to you? Vanessa looked to Derek, then back to me. We just want you to be comfortable. If you sign over some of the assets, we'll handle the taxes, the paperwork, the loans. You won't have to worry about a thing. There's a smaller unit near the lake, great services near church. We'll cover the costs. I nodded as if I were listening to a presentation rehearsed in front of a mirror. Then I placed my phone in the middle of the table. The screen stayed black. The three of us stared at it like a fish on a plate, no one wanting to touch it first. Before I sign anything, I said quietly, "Remind me who owns this apartment." Derek's eyes narrowed. His shoulders twitched. Then he smiled, brittle. "Don't test me with legal semantics, Dad. We all know how things really work. I manage it. You hold the key. The difference is just a signature." I tilted my head, tapped the phone once. A soft beep. I scrolled to a file, dragged the cursor to a familiar point in the recording. The room went still. Then Derek's voice filled the air, cold, metallic, undeniable. "Dad, this is my property. I need you to transfer it so I can handle the taxes in time." A small clink came from Vanessa's glass, like a thin shell cracking. She looked at me, then at him. Her hands pressed against her thighs, fingertips whitening against the fabric. I let the recording run for a few more seconds, just enough to remind us all what intention sounds like, then stopped it. Vanessa straightened her breath tight. "You said that to him." Derek didn't answer. His gaze flicked toward the wall as if hunting for an escape door. "Everyone says things they don't mean," he muttered. "We don't need to drag it out at dinner. There's a difference," I said, "between a slip of the tongue and intent." I leaned back. "I came here to hear what you actually want, not rehearsed lines. If this is peace, then everyone needs to lay something real on the table." Vanessa brushed a candle aside. Its flame bent and threw her face into a shifting half-light. "We're not trying to fight," she said softly. "We just want to make sure nothing reckless happens. You've been through a lot. Acting too fast could be damaging. If you transfer part of it now and revisit later, it'll be safer. Safer for who I asked." "For everyone," Derek said. "The market's unstable. Interest rates change. Banks tighten. If you put it fully under my name, I can deal with them directly. You won't have to. I'll take the strain." I looked him dead in the eye. "You're talking about bearing the strain," I said. "I'm talking about bearing the weight. They look the same from a distance, but up close they're not. You take strain for control. I take weight for accountability. The apartment belongs to the LLC. The LLC belongs to me. That hasn't changed." The air thickened. Even the candle scent turned sharp. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly, then opened them steady again. "Then let's negotiate the rent," she said. 2 years. Smaller increase. Clear maintenance terms. In return, no more surprises. No sudden notices, no management changes. "That can be discussed," I said. "But there's something else." I lifted the phone again. "The night after the funeral, you brought me transfer papers and a deadline to clear out. You called it reality. I called it a test of a grieving man. Different words, same truth." Derek's finger tapped the table. Short, dry, irritated. "Don't drag emotion into the law. I'm trying to finalize assets, that's all. You don't need an entire top floor to yourself. You're sitting on dead capital." I pressed play for a few seconds more. Vanessa's own voice low but crisp. "I think you're too tired to understand this right now." This time she didn't look away. Her spine straightened. Her eyes held mine. I saw calculation there, but also something clear, almost regretful. "You might have been right," I said. I was tired. But I've never confused fatigue with blindness. We sat there a while longer. The air conditioner hummed its mechanical rhythm like a soundtrack chosen by someone who liked irony. I stood resting one hand on the chair back. "You've both forgotten something," I said quietly. "I'm not just your father. I'm the man who wrote the clauses that protect this family. I know where the signatures live and what they cost. I know when to use a soft word and when to use a red seal. And what comes next isn't out of anger." Vanessa drew a long breath and nodded once. "I'm not arguing," she said. "I just want to know if there's still room for a 2-year deal with a lower increase." "There is," I said. "It's in the notice. Talk to management. Propose your terms. Sign the part that says you'll pay on time and respect the shared spaces. This is a market, not a battlefield. Everyone has a place if they stand straight." Derek stared at me, his eyes darkening the look of a man hearing the tide behind him and pretending he's not yet wet. I slid the phone into my jacket pocket. The room suddenly felt wider. I looked around at the paintings, the candles, the neat silverware. Each object like a punctuation mark misplaced in a story that was supposed to be warmer. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "The chicken was good. Next time, if there's a next time, let's start the meal with the truth." I turned toward the door, the handle cool under my palm. Vanessa called out, not pleading, not angry, just practical. "Dad, can we meet management in the morning?" "Anytime during business hours," I said without turning back. Then I opened the door. The hallway outside was still bright white as daylight. My footsteps echoed evenly measured steady. I walked toward the elevator feeling a stone roll off my shoulders. When the doors closed, I saw our reflections layered in the glass, 3 people, 3 shapes of silence. One wanting to negotiate, one wanting to win, and one still holding to the rules that help a man survive the storm. The elevator slid down, leaving behind a 9th-floor apartment filled with candlelight, an unfinished meal, and 2 people sitting in a silence that already knew its own meaning. A week was enough for the lake to calm, for the last foam on the sand to fade. That morning, I went to Whole Foods on South Lamar habit more than need. I pushed the cart past rows of greens, picked a bunch of kale still wet with dew, checked the date on a box of strawberries. The air inside was cold and clean, scented with fruit and fresh bread from the bakery counter. I stopped at the broccoli stand, turned one head over to check the stem. When I looked up, I saw Derek at the end of the aisle, empty hands, face flushed, like he'd run from the parking lot. He walked toward me, stopped just a few feet away. His voice started low, then climbed with each word like he was winding up for a hit. "You've turned this into revenge. You didn't just raise the rent. You wanted to humiliate us. You want us gone." I set the broccoli in the cart and kept one hand on the handle. My voice stayed even, like I was asking the price of produce. "No, I just corrected the balance sheet. You got used to a discount you thought was a right. It wasn't. It was a choice I made for 7 years. Now the market's doing its job." Derek gave a short, metallic laugh. "Don't hide behind the word market like it's holy. You used money to punish. You bought that building just to pull us down. The building isn't a weapon," I said. "It's a mirror. Whoever stands in front of it sees exactly what they are." A middle-aged woman parked her cart nearby, pretending to study onions, but glancing at us through the reflection on the freezer door. At the far end, a young man raised his phone, barely pretending not to record. I could hear the distant hum of the meat slicer, the quiet rhythm of background music, the slow spin of the ceiling fans. Time seemed to slow by half. "You could have negotiated," Derek said through clenched teeth. "Instead, you performed. Everyone sees how much you enjoy this." I shook my head. "You're wrong. I already had enough joy with your mother while she was alive. This isn't enjoyment. It's maintenance." "I don't live off your gratitude, Derek. I live by my principles." A store clerk approached. "Everything all right, folks?" I smiled politely. "We're fine." Derek reached for a bunch of celery, squeezing the stalks until they cracked faintly. "You bought silence, Dad. You bought power. You bought the law, and now you've bought the roof over my head." I answered slowly, each word deliberate. "My voice is in that funeral recording. My silence was at the dinner table last week. And the law. You touched it when you tried to make me sign over property 3 days after burying your mother. Each has its evidence." The young man's phone angled closer. Down the aisle, an older woman paused with an orange in her hand. Her look wasn't angry, just curious, like she wanted to understand. I kept my eyes on Derek. "You don't need to shout for people to hear you," I said. "You just need to speak loud enough for the truth to carry." He narrowed his eyes. "You signed that power of attorney, remember? You gave me authority to handle the finances. No one blames me for finishing the job." I nodded. "I did give you temporary authority with limits and an expiration date. You read every line. But you chose the version that benefited you. I chose the one that was correct. You call that revenge. I call it correction." Someone behind us whispered, "Oh my God." I didn't turn. Derek's face flushed darker. He said, "That clip of yours, you'll regret it. People will see a rich old man bullying his son." Maybe I said. Or maybe they'll see a father holding a boundary after being pushed out of the house he built. You decide what you want them to see. I've already decided what's true. A clerk slid by stacking strawberries, stealing a glance before moving on. The air felt thinner. Derek's breath came sharp. "Tomorrow I'm going to a lawyer. I'll talk about mental competency, about grief-clouding judgment. You weren't thinking clearly after Mom died. If you do that, I said you'll need to bring her full medical file and the testimony of her doctor. Are you ready for that?" He didn't answer. Looked down at his shoes, sniffed, then raised his head again. His voice cracked, but he pushed through. "You could just give us more time. 6 months. I'll make it work." I thought of Janet's email, the renewal option, the 2-year plan with a lower step increase for tenants with good payment history. "That door's already open," I told him. "Knock on it. Sign what needs signing. No need to find a back door, no need to break a wall." A woman beside us dropped a bundle of greens into my cart by mistake. "Oh, sorry," she said with an awkward smile. I handed it back. "All good." In that small exchange, I felt something human loosen between us all, just air a breath. Derek spoke again, softer now, trying to sound steady. "If you weren't my father, I'd teach you a lesson. If I weren't your father, I said this would have ended differently back at the funeral." We stood there in silence. The air conditioner droned on, the store music shifted to an old song. I took the cart handle. "I'll be checking out." Derek stepped aside half a pace. His voice followed me, quiet but clear. "They're recording, you know. You'll look bad." "Whose face looks bad," I said without turning, "depends on who can stand to face the evidence. You picked the stage. I picked the ledger." I pushed the cart toward self-checkout. As I placed each item on the conveyor, I saw the glow of my phone screen reflecting off the barcode scanner. The clerk weighed the kale, quick and careful. I paid, thanked her, took the bags. When I turned back, Derek was gone. Only the crushed celery remained on the shelf, one bruised stalk bent over a slick of condensation on the floor. Outside, dusk slid down the edges of the buildings. I loaded the groceries into the trunk. The phone buzzed non-stop, Janet asking if I wanted an official statement ready in case the media called. Then a text from an unknown number, a link. A 1-minute to 19-second clip. Title, "The Father Evicted by His Son Now Owns the Son's Building." I hit play. Shot from the far end of the aisle. Slight shake when the filmer switched hands. My voice and Derek's both clear. Every word intact. At 48 seconds, a woman sighs. Then silence. I watched to the end, turned off the screen, and leaned back in the driver's seat. Through the windshield, the Austin skyline swallowed the last color of sunset. Below, traffic lights traced thin threads of gold. I couldn't guess where the clip would travel or how far, but I knew it wasn't a knife. It was another mirror. This one standing in the middle of a supermarket. The phone rang again. KVUE Austin. Lauren Bennett. A name I'd saved long ago for reasons I never expected to use. I answered. Her voice was crisp, professional. She said she'd seen the video spreading over the last hour. She wanted both sides, but first needed to confirm one thing. Was I the legal holder of the Haven loan? Yes, I said. She asked if I'd be willing to meet tomorrow at my attorney's office to review documents and record a short statement. I'll agree, I said, if my lawyer's present, and every word is documented in legal language. She replied, That's exactly how I'd prefer it. After hanging up, I called Ruth. She picked up on the second ring. I told her about the encounter at the store, the video, the call from Lauren. She paused, then spoke calmly. Come in tomorrow morning. Bring the funeral recording, the power of attorney papers, the loan transfer file, and the rent adjustment notice. We'll set the record straight. Her sentences were short, deliberate. No wasted breath. I nodded, though she couldn't see it. I'll be there 15 minutes early, I said. We'll prepare the table. I started the car. The engine hummed, smooth and steady. The grocery bags tilted gently on the passenger seat as I pulled into the flow of traffic on South Lamar. An old rule came back to me from my early business days: never wave at the wind when it rises. Set the sail right and let it work for you. The dashboard clock read 6:27. At home, I placed the bags on the counter, turned on the kitchen light, and sat by the window. The city moved outside, silent, unhurried. My phone buzzed one last time, Lauren's calendar invite. I typed one word back: confirmed. Short. Precise. Enough. A fire truck passed outside, siren fading into the horizon. I closed my eyes until the sound dissolved into distance, then opened them again, slow and clear, ready for morning. Morning opened over Austin in a thin wash of silver light, soft as steam over water. I arrived at Ruth's office early, a leather case in hand, carrying every original document. She was already there, pouring coffee from a small machine in the corner. The scent of roasted beans filled the room. Her desk was neatly arranged, 3 folders in a row, and a small black hard drive at the center. Ruth placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Just tell the truth, you believe. Justice doesn't need makeup." Lauren Bennett arrived right on time, camera bag over one shoulder, notepad in hand. The bright, precise gaze of a reporter who knows she's found a story that matters. She shook hands with me, with Ruth, and politely asked to set the camera on the edge of the desk, where the morning light from the window would fall soft enough not to cast harsh shadows. I nodded. The lens clicked on its quiet hum, blending with the sound of the ceiling fan. Lauren began gently. How long had I lived in Austin? What did I do before retirement? What part had Margot played in Vaughn Holdings? I answered briefly, honestly. No embellishment, no defense. Then came the question she had been saving. And Derek? She asked, pen hovering. I said, he used to be my pride. Now he's my lesson. Lauren tilted her head, wrote something down and asked, did you do all this for justice or revenge? Outside the window, sunlight filtered through the oak trees, tracing shifting shadows across the table. If justice makes the guilty pay, I said, then the difference lies in motive, not in motion. I don't want to see my son suffer. I just don't want him believing that he can step over the law and stay untouched. Lauren adjusted the camera angle, slightly framing the shot, as if to hold those words steady. Ruth slid the folders toward her. "Here's the LLC agreement with the original signature," she said, "the temporary power of attorney, and the purchase confirmation from First Capital Bank." Lauren put on thin gloves, turned each page carefully. She studied the seals, the signatures, the timestamps. "All notarized and filed correctly?" she asked. Ruth nodded. Lauren exhaled softly. "These are enough," she said, "to make people rethink the story they've been sharing." "Will they?" I asked. "Or will they just pick a side?" Lauren smiled faintly, the kind of smile you see on someone who knows the cost of her own profession. "The public doesn't look for truth," she said. "They look for the feeling that makes them feel right." When the interview ended, she thanked us and promised to send a pre-broadcast copy. As she packed the cables, I asked, "When will it air?" "In 3 days," she said. "News moves faster than wind. Truth has to wait for editing." I smiled. "Waiting is the still half of justice." "Maybe the hardest half," she replied. After she left, Ruth sat back at her computer. The inbox was already filling with subject lines from local outlets. 2 days later, the first broadcast went live on KVUE. I watched it from my apartment overlooking the lake. The footage was bright, the sound clean, no music, no effects, just the quiet rhythm of facts. Lauren's narration was steady, neutral. Then came the clip from Whole Foods, and finally my interview. The post spread fast. The first comment read, "This old man's cold as stone." The second, "He's teaching an entire generation about accountability." From there, the internet split in two halves, calling me vindictive, the other half calling me a symbol of elder justice. I felt neither anger nor pride. Both sides were half right, but the missing half, they could never understand what it feels like to be erased from your own home by blood you raised. On the third day, Pastor Franklin sent me a link to an article he'd written for the Austin Chronicle. The headline read, "He didn't reclaim property. He reclaimed respect." He wrote that I had always sat in the last pew of the church, quiet, steady, that I didn't talk about faith, but lived as if balance itself were a form of belief. When I finished reading, I leaned back, eyes on the lake, rippling in small silver circles. Maybe Franklin was the only one who truly understood what I was trying to keep. That evening, Lauren called. Her voice was lower this time, hesitant. "There's something you should know before tomorrow's headlines," she said. "What is it? I just got confirmation internal. Derek's been suspended. His company found irregularities in the internal financials. The audit committee's already involved. It's not public yet, but it will leak within 24 hours. I listened to the sound of her pen tapping the desk through the phone. "Do you want to make a statement when it breaks?" she asked. "No," I said. "I won't comment on my son's mistakes. I just want people to know I wasn't the reason he made them." The next morning it was everywhere. Local finance blogs, short blurbs, just a few lines each, but enough to ignite a storm. The son from the viral video suspended amid internal fraud investigation. The comments came fast, judgment, speculation, outrage. Vanessa didn't reply to messages. By afternoon, Ruth informed me she had left the Haven packed light, arranged for a friend to pick up the rest. No one could reach Derek. I sat in the living room listening to the dry tick of the wall clock. Some silences don't come from peace. They come when there's no one left to argue. That night, Lauren texted again. She thanked me for letting her tell the story the way truth allows. She wrote, "You might not believe this, but your story made older viewers across Austin write to the station. Some thanked us. Some just sat in silence." I read the message and turned off the screen. Outside, rain began again, a fine silver rain tracing long streaks down the glass, like strings pulling memories loose from the mind. I thought of Derek when he was small, sitting on the porch, waiting for me to come home from the job site, holding the half-eaten pastry I'd brought him. Back then, he was afraid of the dark. Now he was afraid of the light. I poured a glass of water, drank slowly. In my head, I saw him again in the grocery aisle, voice trembling but still raised high. He wasn't evil. He just believed power was the only shelter for the weak. But he forgot what every man must learn. Strength doesn't come from stepping on someone else. It comes from standing upright after you've been knocked down. And when truth finally comes to light, people always look for someone to blame. My son chose me. Summer came early that year. The Austin sun cut through the air like glass, sharp, relentless. I stood on the steps of Austin County Court, wearing a gray suit just formal enough to fit the gravity of the day. In my hand was the leather briefcase Ruth had packed with every document that mattered. People moved up and down the marble stairs. Reporters hovered 20 yards from the entrance, their camera lenses glinting like small knives in the light. Ruth walked beside me, measured steady. Pastor Franklin followed behind a worn Bible in his hand. He said quietly, "Today isn't about winning. It's about staying right." I nodded. Justice doesn't need to win. It just needs to stand. Inside courtroom 3. The air was cool and polished with the scent of waxed wood and old paper. Derek sat on the right side of the room. Dark suit, black tie, eyes guarded but defiant. His lawyer, a young man with the confidence of someone who still believes the system bends to rhetoric, began sharply. "Your Honor, the plaintiff, Derek Vaughn, alleges that the defendant, Ellis Vaughn, has shown signs of diminished capacity, that he manipulated ownership of Vaughn Holdings LLC to conceal undeclared income and engaged in fraudulent transfers of company assets." The words landed like iron filings across the room. I kept still, eyes on the edge of the table. Ruth sat beside me, her glasses catching the courtroom lights, her expression honed and cool as a blade waiting its turn. Judge McCarthy's silver-haired voice, slow and weighted, looked up from the file. "Does the plaintiff have concrete evidence?" he asked. "Or only conjecture?" Derek's attorney replied, "We have testimony from a former financial consultant, a copy of the old power of attorney, and a witness attesting to Mr. Vaughn's erratic behavior during his wife's illness." He turned toward me on that last phrase, stressing erratic, like slipping a knife beneath velvet. The hearing stretched toward noon. Ruth rose when it was her turn, her posture straight, her tone calm but resonant. "Mr. Vaughn is neither impaired nor negligent," she said. "Every financial action taken by him is transparent, audited, and verified." She placed a thick folder on the table, tax records, stamped by the State of Texas certified loan purchase documents from First Capital and the notarized transfer agreements for the LLC. Each sheet landed with the sound of something permanent being set back in place. Judge McCarthy nodded, motioned for the first witness, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, took the stand, a small woman, hair white as paper, voice steady as stone. "I treated Mr. Vaughn throughout his wife's hospitalization at Del Seaton," she said. "I saw him nearly every day. He wasn't only lucid, he remembered every medical detail, every dosage. He learned how to administer her injections himself. A man without capacity doesn't do that." She paused, glanced toward me. "Most men half his age wouldn't have that kind of patience." Derek lowered his head. His lawyer rose. "Pressing doctor, can you say with absolute certainty that no elderly man ever experiences temporary decline?" She answered simply. Possible, yes. But not this man. The judge nodded. Recorded. Next came Maria Torres, the nurse who had cared for Margot in her final months. I saw him every morning, she said. He shaved her, tracked her medication, spoke clearly with the doctors. He knew exactly what he was doing. People who are confused don't act with purpose. When she stepped down, she passed by me and gave a small, firm nod, confirmation more human than legal. Then it was Ruth again. She reached into her briefcase and produced a small USB drive. Your Honor, this is an audio recording from Mrs. Margot Vaughn's funeral preserved legally. The content is directly relevant. The judge agreed. The file played through the speakers. Derek's voice filled the courtroom, low, clear, echoing off the oak walls. Dad, this property is mine. I need you to transfer it so I can handle the taxes. The sound rolled across the room like a slow tide. Derek froze. His hands tightened until his knuckles whitened. The reporters in the back leaned forward, pens flying. The judge said nothing, just looked toward the plaintiff's table. Derek's attorney stood, voice rising. This man used money to control people. He paid for loyalty, for words, for silence. This, he pointed at me, is performance, not truth. I turned to him, then to my son. No, I said evenly. I didn't buy anyone. I built trust. My son just sold it for a loan. The words fell heavy into the quiet, like a stone breaking the surface of still water. Judge McCarthy tapped the gavel once. Order. He reviewed the documents, his eyes steady and deliberate. He spoke of Derek's contradictory testimony, the validated records, the absence of any evidence of fraud or incompetence. Then he looked up. This court recognizes Mr. Ellis Vaughn as the sole legal owner of Vaughn Holdings, LLC. All charges are dismissed. The gavel struck 3 times, sharp, final. Ruth laid a hand on my shoulder. Franklin nodded faintly, eyes gleaming behind his glasses. The press began to rise, camera flashes popping like sparks. Derek sat motionless, face drained of color. His attorney gathered his papers in silence. I didn't look at my son when I spoke, just enough for him to hear. You just won a lesson, I said softly, by losing to yourself. I stood, walked slowly out of the courtroom. In the corridor, sunlight spilled through the glass panes, scattering across the marble like reflections on a lake. Ruth walked beside me without a word until we reached the door. No one really wins cases like this, she said quietly. I nodded. Justice isn't for display. It's a mirror. You only face it if you're brave enough to look. Outside, the reporters lined the steps. Microphones angled forward. Mr. Vaughn, someone called, do you have a message for the public? I stopped scanning the crowd faces, half curious, half pitying under the hard light of noon. I don't speak for justice, I said. I just do my part. Then I descended the steps, the click of cameras following like gravel shifting underfoot. In the car, the world outside hummed on, distant and loud. Inside, only breath. Through the windshield, I saw Derek exit with his lawyer, his walk slower now, shoulders heavy. I didn't know what he'd do next, but for the first time, I knew he had no one left to blame but himself. I started the engine and pulled away, leaving behind the white glare of the courthouse, a place where one man had just kept his name and another had learned the price of truth. The morning after the trial, sunlight fell across the rooftops like something newly polished. Back at the penthouse, the silence felt different, lighter, almost echoing under my footsteps. The windows were open. Wind from Lake Travis drifted in, carrying the scent of water and pine. I stood in the center of the living room, my eyes tracing every object, each one still where Margot had left it. The blue ceramic vase. The painting she insisted hang a little crooked, so it looks natural. It's strange how a man can win a courtroom battle and still feel small among the things that don't move or breathe. I began cleaning out Margot's closet, not to erase her, just to touch her again. Her perfume lingered faintly mixed with the dry scent of paper from the notes she used to tuck inside her coat pockets. I folded each piece carefully, one by one, until I reached the last drawer, the one she used for her most private things. There, under a stack of scarves, was an envelope. Its edges yellowed, her handwriting slanted and gentle. If you're reading this. I sat on the edge of the bed. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The paper was the same kind Margot had used for letters when we were newly married, soft, faintly textured. The ink had bled in spots, probably from humidity. I read slowly each line, a voice half alive in the air, Ellis. If you're reading this, I'm probably no longer there to say what I should have said sooner. I know you'll choose silence when things fall apart. You always believe truth finds its way back if you don't chase it. But with Derek, it might be different. If he forgets love, don't be angry. Let truth teach him the way you once taught me with patience. You told me once that justice doesn't arrive through anger, but through time. If that's true, live long enough to see it come. And when it does, forgive him, not because he deserves it, but because you've earned your rest. I left the small wedding band in the cherrywood box in the bottom drawer. It's not a keepsake. It's a reminder. Some things we can't keep, but we can still leave them in the right place. Margot. I stopped reading. My fingers still gripped the edge of the page. The last line slanted just slightly like her voice when she was tired. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, washing the ink, until it almost vanished, but never did. I sat there for a long time, hearing her voice again in my head, not instructing, not forgiving, just steady like someone who'd already made peace with everything I was. I set the letter down and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a small cherrywood box polished smooth with time. The ring lay there, gold-thinned by years of wear. When I held it, the light caught it just right, flashing like a whisper I could almost hear. She always knew how to end a conversation, I murmured, even when she wasn't here. I walked through the apartment opening windows, letting the wind lift the dust that had settled over the weeks. On the desk, the Vaughn Holdings file still waited. I sat down, flipped through each page, each transaction, every signed document. Everything was correct, legal, orderly, final. Yet something felt wrong. Not in the numbers, but in the reason to keep them. That building had done its job just like I had. That afternoon, I called Ruth. She answered right away. "You sound lighter," she said. "I want to sell the Haven," I told her, "to an investment fund." There was a pause. "Are you sure? As sure as a man who's walked the last hill and has no need to climb back?" Ruth's tone softened. "I can negotiate a good price. The market's high right now. Let them pay what it's worth," I said. "No more, no less. I just want it done." "And what will you do with the money?" "Start a foundation." "What kind?" I hesitated for a moment. "The Margot Vaughn Foundation," I said finally. 3 days later, we signed the deal. The buyer, a Dallas real estate fund, closed fast. The transfer landed in the Vaughn Holdings account before sunset, along with a brief note from their representative. "We hope you enjoy your retirement." I smiled. Retirement wasn't the point. Peace was. That evening, I called Ruth again. She was still at the office. I could hear the keys clicking behind her. "I want to set up the foundation this week," I said. "The full name is the Margot Vaughn Foundation for Civil Integrity. Its mission: support elder citizens in civil claims, those who can't afford lawyers, those exploited by their own families. Ruth stopped typing. "You really want that name?" "Yes," I said. "Because justice should come with compassion." I heard her exhale. Margot would smile if she knew. I said she wouldn't smile. She'd ask if I'd filed the tax documents for it yet. We both laughed, a thin, honest sound. After the call, I stepped onto the balcony. Lake Travis shimmered beneath the setting sun, its surface like hammered silver. On the table, yesterday's half-finished glass of wine waited. I lifted it, watching the sky's orange reflection ripple through the stem. Everything seemed calm, not empty, just settled. I thought of all those nights Margot sat by the window, reading her hair catching the lamplight while I sat across from her, reviewing financial reports. She used to say, "You live like a man keeping a ledger of life, every line balanced, never noticing which pages are already full." I hadn't argued. She was right. But today I thought maybe I could finally close that book. On the desk lay a fresh notepad. Across the top in my handwriting, "The Margot Vaughn Foundation for Elders Who Deserve Dignity, Not Pity." I looked at the line, then signed beneath it. My name sat smaller, slightly off to the right, as if I'd left room for hers. Outside, the wind shifted, catching a few loose pages and sending them tumbling across the floor. I reached out to stop them, and the rustling paper sounded like soft laughter. I sank back into the chair, body easing, heart quiet. Through the window, the glass reflected two shapes, mine and the empty chair beside me. Not heavy anymore. Just two silhouettes watching the last light fade over the Texas horizon. 6 months passed faster than I expected. Austin had changed color. The trees lining Congress Avenue were painted gold. The wind carried the dry scent of grass and the faint echo of a choir rehearsing downtown. I stood in the City Hall atrium, where rows of nameplates were set neatly across the seats. On stage, a brushed metal plaque glimmered under the lights, "The Margot Vaughn Foundation for Family Integrity." Beneath it, the inscription Ruth had suggested, "For Justice and Compassion." I stared at it for a moment, feeling a stillness inside me, the kind that lingers after the wind stops, but the air is still cool. The ceremony was small, intimate. A few dozen guests. Ruth sat in the front row, speech notes folded neatly in her lap. Pastor Franklin stood beside a group of law students, the first recipients of the Foundation's scholarship program. I saw Maria Torres and Dr. Chen, both dressed simply, both smiling the way only honest people do. To the right, the KVUE crew adjusted their cameras. Lauren was there too. Same ponytail, same bright eyes, but this time her gaze carried respect, not curiosity. When I stepped up to the podium, I brought no notes. I didn't need any. The microphone hummed softly, catching the tremor of my breath. I said I hoped no one would ever have to learn fairness by losing a family. Justice. I told them, isn't a weapon. It's a mirror. When you stand before it without flinching, it shows you what excuses can't hide. I paused, letting the silence breathe. Then I added, Margot once taught me that fairness alone isn't enough without kindness. Today, I'm just doing what she once said, putting her name beside what she believed in. The applause wasn't loud, but it was warm, the kind that feels human rather than ceremonial. Franklin took the podium next. He spoke of Margot, of the mornings she baked cookies for the church fundraiser, of her humility, of how her compassion reached farther than anyone ever saw. I looked down at the microphone, remembering the night she held my hand in the hospital. "Don't be afraid of being alone," she had said. "If you keep kindness, you'll never really be by yourself." I heard Franklin's prayer, then the sound of people rising, the clicking of cameras, and the wind slipping through the tall glass doors. As the event neared its end, Ruth glanced toward the back of the hall. I followed her gaze and froze. A man stood near the doorway, tall, thinner now, his suit slightly wrinkled. Derek. Even with his head bowed, I knew. No watch on his wrist, no sharpness in his stance, just the quiet weight of someone who'd run out of defenses. His eyes met mine, hesitant, searching, and then stayed there. Franklin walked over, placed a hand on his shoulder, whispered something I couldn't hear. Derek nodded, then began to walk toward me. When he stopped in front of me, there was no anger, no bravado left. His voice came out rough, frayed at the edges. "Dad, I was wrong. I thought I was saving the family, but I was selling it." The room fell silent. I saw not the man standing before me, but the boy who once waited for me in the garage while I welded the door of our first house. "I forgive you, Derek," I said, "but this time the keys stay with me." He bowed his head. His eyes shone red. I put a hand on his shoulder lightly as if to test that he was real. Franklin stepped closer, smiling gently. Sometimes, he said, loss is the truest form of growing up. Derek just nodded. No argument, no words. Ruth approached, then handing me a document with the city seal embossed in gold. "The foundation is officially chartered," she said. "Its accounts are open, and the first legal aid projects start next quarter." I thanked her. She turned to join the group of young attorneys gathered at the signing table, their laughter rising like a new beginning. When the crowd began to thin, I stayed behind a few minutes longer. Derek said he'd be heading home, his voice small, as if afraid the air might carry it too far. I didn't stop him. "You can come here anytime," I said. "The door's always open. Just make sure you're the one turning the handle." He nodded and walked away. Franklin followed him to the exit, while I remained by the bronze plaque newly mounted in the lobby. The Margot Vaughn Foundation for Family Integrity shimmered in the late afternoon sun. I reached out, tracing her name with my fingertips, feeling the cool metal against my skin. My eyes were wet, but there was no ache, only that strange blend of presence and farewell. Margot once told me, "There's no true beginning until you're brave enough to close what came before." Maybe for the first time, I understood. I wasn't closing the past. I was placing it where it belonged so it could guide someone else home. Lauren passed by, stopped to greet me. She said my speech had moved people to tears, that the station might rebroadcast it to help raise more funds. I told her if they truly listen, they'll know justice isn't about opposition. It's about keeping each other from falling. She smiled, nodded, and left. Franklin returned, his voice soft. Margot would be proud. I smiled back. No. She'd just say it took me 6 months to understand what she knew for 40 years. He laughed, patted my shoulder, and walked away. When the hall emptied, I sat in the front row. Ruth had left a small bouquet there, lavender, Margot's favorite. Its scent drifted lightly through the air. The sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, touching the plaque, until the engraved letters glowed like they were alive. I lifted my head, exhaled slowly, and for the first time since I buried Margot, I smiled without effort. Outside church bells rang across the city, mingling with the hum of traffic and the distant laughter of strangers like an old song returning after a long silence. I rose and walked toward the doors. Each step felt lighter than the last. At the threshold, sunlight swept across the marble floor. I turned once more to look back at her name, and the smile came naturally warm and real, somewhere between love and release, caught in the space before tears could fall. Morning spilled across Lake Travis like a mirror stretched to the horizon. The first sunlight shimmered across the rippling water, tracing gold over each small wave. I sat on the old wooden chair on the cabin porch, coffee steaming in my hands. From somewhere across the lake came the rhythm of oars and the distant laughter of a young couple folded into the bird song that drifted through the air. It was peace, the kind I hadn't felt in years, the kind you don't find, only return to. Next to me, Emily Derrick's 8-year-old daughter drew in her small sketchbook with colored pencils. She was drawing a house with a red roof and round windows. She looked up at me, eyes bright, the same curious light Margot once had. "Grandpa," she said, "Mom told me you used to have a house that could talk. Is that true?" I laughed softly. "Who told you that story, Dad?" she said, "but he never said where the house was." I set my cup down and looked out over the lake where the light danced like it was listening. "Yes," I said, "I had a house that could talk. Not with words, but with what happened inside it. When people stopped listening to each other, the house found its own ways to remind them, sometimes through a draft of wind, sometimes through silence." Emily leaned her chin on her hand. "What did the house say to you?" I smiled. "It said that if you listen carefully, you'll hear the things people are too afraid to say out loud." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Did Dad hear it too?" I took a breath. "He does now," I said, "but not at first." She nodded and drew a bigger window. Something in me eased, as if each line of her drawing was helping the house breathe again. From my pocket, I pulled the old envelope, the one with Margot's letter. The ink now faded the paper, soft from years of being unfolded and read. I read it again the way some people pray, slowly, reverently, afraid to miss a word. Every time I read it, I understood something new. This time, when I reached the last line, the sadness was gone. All that was left was lightness, like she was still here in the wind, in the sound of water, in the way Emily's eyes searched mine. "Come on," I said. "Let's go to the dock." Emily slipped her small hand into mine, warm, certain. We walked down the gravel path, damp earth beneath our feet, the air still holding the scent of last night's rain. At the dock, I sat down and opened the envelope one last time. The letter fluttered in the soft wind. Sunlight washed over the slanted handwriting, gentle and familiar as Margot's voice. "You know, Emily," I said quietly, "I didn't win against your father. I just found the part of myself I almost lost." She looked up. "What part is that, Grandpa? The part that knows when to stop fighting because you're already right," I said, "and when to forgive because you're no longer angry." I folded the letter and set it gently on the water. The breeze carried it out, spinning slowly like a petal before it sank. The sunlight caught the ink, turning the words to gold before they disappeared beneath the surface. Emily watched, holding my hand tighter. "I think Grandma heard that," she whispered. I smiled. I'm sure she did. We sat there a while longer. The wind rustled through the oaks, the water tapped softly against the dock, the sound Margot used to call the breathing of time. I leaned back, eyes on the wide Texas sky, and in that quiet, I knew I had finally walked the full length of my anger past the loss, past the lessons, into something close to peace. I turned to Emily. "You hungry?" She laughed and nodded. We walked back toward the cabin. The smell of baked bread lingered in the air. When the door closed behind us, sunlight still spilled through the slats, laying our shadows across the wooden floor. One tall, one small, 2 generations still part of the same story, only now without bitterness. I took out my phone. At the top of my contacts, Derrick's name waited. I typed, "Thank you for letting Emily visit." A few minutes later, his reply came. "Thank you for having her." That was enough. Some things don't need to be said when they're finally understood. Outside, the sun climbed higher. I stepped onto the porch and looked out over the lake where the letter had already vanished. A faint breeze moved through the lavender bushes Margot used to plant by the edge of the grass. From the kitchen came Emily's laughter, the clinking of plates, the sound of life returning. I lifted my face to the wind. "Thank you, Margot," I whispered, "for still teaching me even from where you are. Thank you for staying until the end of my story. If you believe that peace is the kindest form of revenge, share this story, so someone out there who's lost their heart might find it again just as I did one quiet spring morning on the shores of Lake Travis. And if this story moved you, leave a comment to tell me what it meant to you, hit like, and subscribe with the notification bell on so you won't miss the next story about family forgiveness and finding peace again.